let you know, Ron.
Yeah, we're driving up upstate.
Who's listening to cartoons, Mike?
Not I.
I know I don't have one. It got destroyed and I fell into a river in Vermont. Because they have the things that you gotta use a smart pass.
That's what it was.
Excuse me, I'm trying up to American you being the most gracious like that.
So did you ask your Rick about the
Right here,
step?
leaving afterwards.
I did not.
29th, we went there for a while.
Yeah, I asked him, he said, we had gear.
It'll be 81 for the next couple of days out there.
He said,
It'll stay that warm by the time we get out there.
I mean, they're always, you know.
Makes sense.
I was looking on
Maybe
the
upstairs.
where we're going. Upstate New York. It's a little town called Pdasd.
They could make it even easier.
So where's the GIMP section?
Yeah.
They could. Do you think they will?
With, how many inches of snow?
We live in a fancy.
It wasn't snowing. They get about,
We come here later in the day, like
in January, they average about 10 centimeters.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
no.
all good.
You know, what did they do, Tommy?
What?
You'd like to Tommy or?
I don't know.
I don't care.
Oh, okay, well then,
That's how long ago was it?
Yeah, yeah.
I just saw them earlier, something happened.
We'll just see what kind of.
Hey Jeff, your book is, your Katrina book is in the office.
How's that? Does that work?
We'll attack you from both sides.
Put it up on eBay. Yes.
That was Jeff Porter.
Spirited. He's
I checked the weather, Jeff, in Waco.
Yeah.
That's in the 70s during the day,
Is that where you guys are headed next week?
Monday.
Monday?
Yes?
no,
8 days.
Riding around Baghdad.
We go to the school.
I
You
talked
know, we
Yeah.
leave, like,
And
we get to
he
school
sounds
last
much
night,
better
8
today
o'clock.
than
Go back to sleep, have a
Tuesday,
second
Wednesday were
breakfast.
pretty brutal.
Bring food there.
When you go to
Start
Albania
reading
and
my
get the
book.
40-year-old Chinese
Usually get done with about 5-6 books.
You're just one cheer a minute, aren't you?
Play on the computer, some movies, smoke a couple of cigars.
Did you used to go to
back-
Kennebunkport?
Huh?
Did you used to go to Kennebunkport? Was it nicer up there?
Almost.
Yeah, I like it too.
And if you went outside, was it something like that?
Greetings, you can just sit down at the States Hotel, and sat on, like, we had a great big floor.
Yeah.
That was just great, and right across the street was the briefing center.
Or Hyannis
He gave
or
a wonderful
Cape Cod, wherever.
Yeah,
Did you
the
hear
best
that?
place we used to go was
Here, and then we're going there, and then we're
go to
going
Miami
to
in the winter and California in the summer.
There's something to be
And
said.
it was almost every week.
I just thought about that yesterday. Poor old Nixon, he'd be rolling in his grave.
The people
There?
say
Now we can
Clinton
start.
played the president.
Absolutely.
So I've
Yeah.
been covering him since Johnson. And I said, well, let's
Don't
think
start
where they
yawning
took him.
like Charles.
That's what counts.
It wasn't Carter.
I can't keep both, I can't keep both.
Lita will do it to you, you know? All you gotta do is keep moving those hips from side to side.
You're gonna wonder why I'm bobbing
Except
back
the later
and
this
forth.
briefing starts, the later I go to the rest of it.
Gripping.
Even at CNN, because just as we are, we technically cannot do this.
Okay. I'll throw something in me, just so we have something.
And we have 6
Why and why not?
Well, can't you just ask?
Could you answer the question?
Yeah.
Stress fracture. I
When they're done
finally have to do something about it. It's been finally, the doctor said yesterday, you put this damn thing It all started in Katrina. Apparently, when I banged my knee getting out of the well, at least 2 weeks. Yeah, stress fractures just need to be.
I couldn't decide for when I had a minute to actually read it.
A lot of it has to do with you're walking around.
As opposed to you couldn't go to.
Oh, I just take it off. I have a shoe. So that's my equation, because I'd rather be able to drop. But even today,
And in
it's
fact, that was
amazing.
the only one on the
At least right. Because it's in elbows, because I can't inadvertently, bend over and walk on it. I haven't actually had these.
What's his name?
What's his name? Vertical belly, but I have the.
That's a miracle.
But anyway, the point is,
That's right, this is why I'm actually. Oh, I had that last year when I had surgery. That might have been right before. Yes, it is, because Alex, bless his heart, left my car parked out.
Just the compound sentence.
To have everybody they just put me a very official local speeding ticket from the Pentagon police, because there's a 3-mile intersection.
He has it easy. You guys do just fill out the ticket.
And I was fairly consistently violated, and people were sort of looking out of the way.
So he put a ticket
He put a ticket on a citation on there, but it would be taken away from me later in the reports.
As opposed to what we're gonna hear now.
Got me so good. So it was right before he left.
And he's gonna fall asleep after the first question. His own.
You know, they want 84 things.
I got it.
I'm gonna go back to see if I can maybe use.
Are you leaving for the holiday report?
Good afternoon, everyone. We thought it would be helpful to come down, I think, one last time in year 2005 to just catch up on some loose ends before everybody gets what I hope you will be able to get, which is a well-deserved break for the holidays, and we wish you happy holidays as coming forward. I don't have any specific comments, and I don't know, General Conway, if you have any. Otherwise, we'll just be happy to. I'll just acknowledge that the Secretary has arrived in Baghdad. I think there's been some reporting on that already. He's on a trip that has taken him thus far to Pakistan, where he was able to observe U.S. And other country relief efforts in the earthquake, as well as a visit to Afghanistan, which was reported yesterday, to meet with President Karzai and other Afghan leaders, U.S. force coalition commanders, and has now arrived in Baghdad, where he'll be for the short period of time ahead. And with that, I'd be happy to take some questions.
Larry, any progress, in general, any progress on drawdowns beyond the baseline 138,000?
We don't have anything to announce.
Considering, I mean,
Yeah.
I think you pretty openly have conceded that you're considering possibly canceling the deployment of up to two brigades, but any decisions have been made on that?
We don't have anything to announce. I've seen a wire story moving around, but we don't have anything to announce, and the Secretary is obviously meeting with General Casey, Ambassador Khalilzad, and we'll withhold until there's an
You don't have
announcement.
anything to announce. Are you suggesting that the decision might have been made and you're just not ready to announce it? Or has no decision been made yet?
I think I'll hold with what I had. I mean, you know, I know the strong desire to want to get in between assessments and recommendations and decisions and announcements, but we are where we are, which is there's nothing to announce. It is true that we had previously acknowledged that when we did the 06 to 08 rotation, that a couple of brigades, we had some potential decisions pending on those, and so we're working through all of that. And as we do that, and we're able to make firm conclusions, we will announce those conclusions. I don't know, General, if you have anything.
The dead horse. Do Do you expect that you might make an announcement before the end of the year, or possibly?
Well, we certainly owe those units a little more information before the end of the year. That's accurate. I don't know, General, if you have any.
Yes, no, that's exactly right. That's what we told them when we put them on delay, was that sometime very shortly after Christmas, there would be further instructions forwarded.
So you expect an announcement before the end of the year, would you say?
We owe first Infantry Division another order, if you will, to somehow change their status, and that will happen sometime, I think, before the end of the year.
Larry, the Army Field Manual, Congress's bill clearly lays it out that is going to be sort of the law of the land here. Can you give us at least an update on the progress? And I know you've said all along that it's being vetted out to the combatant commanders, but can you at least expand a little bit on what maybe some of the key discussion or debate surrounding that is, and whether or not some of the McCain language is coming into play?
Yeah, it's not. The last part is not a factor. In other words, we understand that the Congress will pass legislation that does what you've described, and which has been widely reported on. The debate, if you will, it's not a debate as much as a desire for there to be a clear understanding of what is expected out of this field manual, and ultimately what is expected out of interrogators in the course of collecting intelligence for the purposes of the global war on terror. So everybody wants to be sure that that this manual will be something that interrogators can understand, that commanders can understand and implement, and that there isn't any uncertainty as to what categories of individuals are covered by it in terms of the types of detainees that we may have in the world. So I wouldn't say it's a debate as much as a desire that there be as an extensive understanding as possible across the department. While it's an Army field manual per se, the Army is the executive agent for something that applies to the entire Department of Defense, so that includes combatant commanders, and it includes interrogation commands and training commands, and so everybody that is responsible either for the input or the output of this production deserve the opportunity to comment on it, and that's the stage that we're in right now. Anything you want to add to that? Yeah, Brian.
Can either of you tell me, have any of the assets of the Department of Defense been used to intercept any communications from journalists working inside the United States, maybe communicating with somebody outside the United States?
I'll tell you, the President has discussed this program, the Attorney General has discussed it, and we're not going to be able to provide any further elucidation on it. As a general matter, this department doesn't discuss intelligence operations, and as a specific matter, this has been discussed fully by the President, the Attorney General, and obviously some members of Congress are starting to discuss it further, so we're not going to have any additional detail.
This program say, I know that DIA has
we don't
an office
discuss
out at
intelligence operations, you know that.
Well, you can't say whether or not the Department of Defense has been involved in intercepting the communications of journalists working inside the United States. You can't definitively give an answer to that question.
I said we don't discuss intelligence operations. I didn't say what you just said. Yeah.
With regard to the Lincoln Group contract, is that going to carry over into the new year? And also,
which Lincoln Group contract are you referring to?
With regard to placing the stories in Iraqi media?
Oh, that's under review. General Casey, I think, spoke about it last week. Do you have any more on it?
No, investigation is still underway at this point. No conclusions that have been announced.
General, from your standpoint, does that stuff really help, or do people just see through it?
I think it's helpful. I think that in Iraq, you don't have precisely a free press, and that there is a desire to get accurate information to them. And so I think that where it's correctly characterized, where people are able to read in the opinion page what's presented, I think it's helpful that they have the facts that are presented by the group or by MNF.
I think to expand a little bit on what General Conway said, it's not so much. I mean, I think the concern in that what the coalition forces are trying to ensure is that there is so much active disinformation against the coalition and against the Iraqi government generally that they've concluded it is helpful that there be a venue for what they can validate as accurate, truthful information, and that's the challenge, is that they're in an environment where there's a lot of active disinformation, so they feel like at least having some channels of accurate information is worthwhile, and we'll let the investigation sort itself out as to whether or not the program was executed as intended, and whether people had perhaps there had been transgressions of the policies. Nobody seems to. There's no reason to believe that, but some allegations have been made, and they deserve to be reviewed, and they are being reviewed.
The Secretary's talked repeatedly about the fact that there's a free Iraqi media.
Right.
That is getting to the point where it's doing its thing in much the same way as we would do our thing. The fact that this Lincoln Group contract exists, doesn't that sort of undercut his contention?
Well, some have said that. I don't know if the folks that are in Iraq who are actually implementing the program and Iraqi public feels that way. So there is a burgeoning press in Iraq. I mean, there are multiple outlets for information, but that means there are multiple outlets for disinformation as well. So what we're trying to do is the coalition has attached value, and I know that there's that there is discussions with other Iraqis about whether or not this is valuable. They've attached value in determining that it'd be nice to have a venue where we're confident that there's some accurate information getting out there. But it is accurate also to acknowledge that there are probably over 100 newspapers in Iraq, and God knows how many television stations, and
Internet.
And the internet. So there's a lot of venues of information, and people, I think it would be best to understand what the coalition's trying to do in that context as one channel of information in an environment where there are just literally hundreds of channels of information.
One last follow on
Sure.
this. You mentioned the internet. Is the department doing anything in terms of maybe blogs that are anonymously DoD to try to counteract misinformation on the internet as well?
If it were anonymous, we wouldn't be talking about it, would we?
Well, you could now, right?
We do have, and I've acknowledged this, we've discussed this elsewhere, some programs that began in the time frame of the Balkan conflicts, where combatant commanders have internet websites where people can go to that are quite analogous, and we've asked that those be reviewed as well. This is over almost a year ago now, to just be sure that we're comfortable. There is transparency with these websites. The degree of transparency is an important question. So, yeah, we've acknowledged that in the past. I'm not aware that there are any in the Central Command AOR area of responsibility. There may be. I'm not aware. We've asked as a general policy matter that we review how those websites are managed. But, again, they began, as I said, I think in the Balkans conflict with Bosnia, maybe Kosovo. Yep. Brian.
Follow up on Charlie's dead horse. Knowing that nothing's been decided, can you give us a ballpark figure of how many troops these two brigades would involve? There's been some confusion. I mean, just a sort of ballpark estimate.
Well, a brigade traditionally consists of about 3,500 troops, sometimes as large as 4,000, but that's the range. 3 battalions and a headquarters.
But I think, and again, when we got something to announce, we'll do our best to explain the full context of the decisions. But as we begin to what the General Casey has discussed, shift more emphasis toward assisting the Iraqis doing these training teams, assisting them on service, combat support, and combat service support. You may see shifts from combat units toward other types of units, and so relying on a given number for a given unit is a recipe for uncertainty on your part. We'll try and be very clear once decisions are ready to be discussed and announced as to exactly what all the puts and takes are.
Also, if correct me if I'm wrong, but if you cancel a brigade of 3,500 to 4,000 people, you're also talking about at least an extra 1,000, certainly hundreds of support people that might also be needed.
Well, not necessarily, Charlie. Now, there are, inside the brigade, there are organic logistics personnel. But in terms of the logistics structure in Iraq, certainly it supports our troops, but it also supports the increasing numbers of Iraqi troops. And we are in the process of developing their combat service support mechanisms. It may be that we have to bridge that for a while. And so I would say to you that there's not an automatic parallel in terms of any downsloping between combat units and combat service support units.
So if you cancel, in other words, if you cancel the movement of a large combat unit, that wouldn't necessarily mean canceling movement of combat support units.
That's right, that are not organic. That's right, that are not organic to that unit.
The desire for understanding on this is we really do. We'll have something to announce soon enough, and when we do, we'll do our very best to make sure that nobody gets too wrapped up around a given number that has been out there that people want to focus on, because you'll need to understand any decisions in the full context of puts and takes, and we'll do our best to understand
say how many you're going below the 138, at least with this order.
We'll have something to talk about soon enough. Barbara.
A slight multi-part question. General Conway.
How surprising from you, Barbara.
Well, since you're clearly taking...
I'm not taking multi-part questions. We're just taking lots of questions.
Yeah. For General Conway, two different subjects entirely, sir. Does the U.S. military have any comment or view or thoughts about the German release of Muhammad Ali Hamda, the man convicted of killing the Navy diver Robert Steedham back in 1985 during the hijacking of TWA Flight 847? And then I just wanted to ask you a quick follow-up on Iraq.
Barbara, I think probably the closest thing to an official statement comes from the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Mullen, who commented to the effect that I think we all remember the day, those of us been in uniform for some time, remember the day that the sailor died, that his death was a cowardly and terrorist act, but in our minds, he died a hero. We have named the ship after him, and we very much regret the incident.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is just to, on Iraq, to follow up a little bit on what Larry was saying. The military strategy for 2006 of maybe shifting the types of units, shifting not the mission in Iraq, but the kinds of tactical things that these troops are doing. Could you just talk a little bit about that? What's the thinking? What allows you to go down that road?
Sure.
What will it look like?
Sure, Barbara, I'd be happy to. I think it's a continued maturation of the Iraqi security forces, both Army and police. Our efforts are really along two parallels. One is what we call partnering, wherein American battalions in the field, where Iraqi battalions are assigned, immediately partner with those units and provide them with a whole host of things, training, operational base. They provide them logistics, and they provide them access to American systems. And on a routine basis, that's how you're now seeing these combined operations, wherein American forces are out, but in every case there's an Iraqi force, sometimes of equal size, sometimes even larger numbers of Iraqis who are in this operational lead. That's the partnering aspect of it. The second part of it has to do with our transition teams. And you're going to see increasing numbers of senior people assigned in these teams that number in the low teens, that will live with, eat with, sleep with, and fight with Iraqi units. And they also are assigned responsibilities for the continued maturation and professionalism of the Iraqis, so that as they become more and more capable, we are then able to bring our units home.
What will we be seeing U.S. troops do less of themselves? What will they be pulling back from doing because they won't have to?
Well, I think the whole nature of countering the anti-Iraqi forces is something that we more and more want to see the Iraqi forces stand up and be able to do. So the typical things that you might see associated with combat operations, cordon and knock, patrols, sweeps, those types of things that you've been reading about American soldiers and Marines doing over the last year, you're going to read increasingly about Iraqi units doing those things. And Tal Afar is probably the first and best example of that, where the ratio of Iraqi forces to U.S. forces was much different from what we had perhaps seen in the past as they were coming online.
So just tell me, what kind of, when Larry talked about maybe different kind, or one of you were mentioning different kinds of troops, U.S. troops being needed next year, what kinds of different troops? Who's going that would be different?
Well, if you feature a traditional American unit there now, you've got a few officers and a large number of soldiers or Marines who are grunts and fire support guys and logisticians who are doing their work. These advisors are made up of more technically oriented people, a little more senior on average, probably starting with staff NCOs, going all the way up through lieutenant colonels or colonels, depending on where they're assigned. They have these technical fields, these expertise, if you will, that will allow them to plug into the Iraqi units and give them what they don't have at this time, which is, again, logistics capability in some instances, better training opportunities, and the ability to call in supporting arms, American arms or coalition force arms, if they get into trouble.
As increasing Iraqi combat units come online, what they lack but are growing are this what we would call combat support and combat service support. So you may see more of those engineering and logistics and those kinds of U.S. assistance to enable these combat units, Iraqi combat units, to function. And over time, obviously, they'll develop those combat support and combat service support capabilities as well. Nick.
I'd like to ask you, General Conway, a question about Afghanistan. In the past 5 or 6 months, there have been several spikes in violence that have resulted in the highest number of U.S. casualties than in any other time period, similar time period in the past 4 years. To what do you attribute that? Are the Taliban and or Al-Qaeda becoming more aggressive, more sophisticated? Why have we seen those spikes in violence that have resulted in these higher number of U.S. casualties?
We have seen a larger number of attacks, okay, and I think with those numbers of attacks, I'll tell you, they're not very efficient, Jim. I mean, if you look at the numbers of attacks that actually cause casualties versus the slope of the numbers of attacks, they are terribly inefficient. But we are seeing more use of IEDs, more use of close-in explosives, suicide BBIDs in some instances, than what we have seen in the past, where it was typically a small arms skirmish. So we're keeping a close eye on that. It looks like some of the things that we've seen in Iraq have perhaps migrated to Afghanistan. But I think that's the principal reason that you're seeing some of these attacks more lethal.
Now, is it believed that this is just a case of imitators in Afghanistan, or do you believe that there are actually Iraqi operatives who have migrated to Afghanistan to carry out this IED explosive?
We've seen no instance of Iraqis in Afghanistan that I'm aware of.
Or anybody who may have been trained in Iraq to migrate back?
No, nothing like that.
John.
Larry, a question about troops and strength across the broader Army, not just in Iraq. At the town hall meeting last week, the Secretary had an interesting comment. He was talking about Army modularity. Said the Army is going to grow to 42 brigades or thereabouts.
Right.
The official number is 43. We've all learned, sometimes painfully so, how precise the Secretary can be. We listened to him carefully, the way people read Pravda. Was he speaking that way for some reason, or is he telling us that the money or the QDR is saying the Army cannot grow to 43?
You're correct about the Secretary's desire for precision, so I'll stipulate to that. First of all, there haven't been final decisions because these are ultimately presidential decisions in the context of budget. What we have seen is a significant increase in defense spending over the last many years, 2001 till now for sure. Significant shifts in investment in this department so that the Army can develop this modularity. The operational Army has grown substantially in the last couple of years. And in the headroom that growth has allowed, they've been able to conduct this reorganization into brigade modular units. At the same time, the Army is trying to find the right balance between the redesigned Army, which will end up being some 70, 75 brigades across the range, active and reserve component, and the technology that will enable that redesigned Army to be as capable as it can be. And they're trying to strike that balance. And as the future combat system, which is the Army's future vision for network technology, becomes more refined as they do greater research and procurement into the future combat system, you probably will see them making assessments of the right balance between how many units and then how much technology to start bringing online to connect those units. There haven't been decisions, but that's the evaluation the Army's been making this year. Is we like where we're going. We're at 32 or 3 modular brigades right now. We're going to go up, as the Secretary accounted for. But at the same time, we're getting more confident in understanding what the future combat system is and the investments in that.
Slip. Did he mean to say 42 or did he mean to say 43 and he just said 42?
You interrupted me. That was,
I don't mean to
wasn't
interrupt
very
you, but
polite
you're
in
not really
holiday
answering the
season.
question.
I'm trying to explain the decision, these discussions in the way that they best are understood, and that is, we're at 34. We're going to go up. That's for sure. As we shoot for that target of what's the right number of brigades, the Army is also trying to assess and what's the right number of what's the right volume of technological investment to be making to match that brigade. And so that's where we stand, and we'll have decisions made when the President decides the budget. So.
But it would be fair to say then that the final end number of modular brigades is still under review, and that the hard target of 43 that we've all written many times is now no longer a hard target.
I would not. You would have to decide whether you think it was a hard target. At one year, you make an assessment. Here's where I think we're going, and then you're always adjusting the knobs and the dials and saying, "Well, I'm going to try and make some shared investments across the range of modularity as well as investments in technology." We know we're going up. The Army, the operational Army, has gotten substantially larger over the last few years, and we are at some level of low 30s of modular brigades, and we'll be somewhere in the low 40s when this is all over, on the active side, and some commensurate level on the reserve side. So.
Larry, if I can follow up on that.
Please do.
Thank you very much. How are you guys going to explain this technology to the people who need to write the checks? I mean, these Army programs that are going to be the WIN-T, JNN, they're pretty incomprehensible even to those of us who work around them a lot. So how do you convince people that these are worth spending $5 billion a year on?
Well, there's the American public has made a substantial investment in defense. That's a fair point, and therefore, this Defense Department, as stewards of the public's money, has the responsibility to let that public understand what it's getting for its investment, and that's a challenge we face every year when we submit the budget. Many of our programs are complicated. Many of them have acronyms nobody understands but the program manager, and yet, I think there's been a general understanding that in the world we're in now, investing 3% of our GDP in the defense of our country is a worthwhile investment, and then we take on individual programs and do our best to explain them, and when the President proposes and the Congress disposes. If we can't explain them sufficiently and can't demonstrate how we'll execute them, the Congress will adjust them, and we know that.
So what do these technology programs actually do?
Well, I'm not in a position, as you might imagine, to be able to give you a detailed briefing on the Army's future combat system, but when we've made preliminary decisions in the budget, we'll do that.
Broadly speaking, can you say why this technology is so great we
Yeah,
should defer
the Army
manpower?
believes that what we all believe generally is that we have moved into a world where speed, agility, precision, and networking has changed the face of battle. Prior to, let's just say in the last century, we were a fixed force where mass and concentration mattered a lot. That still matters on some level. But what we've also learned, and we've learned it through Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, and a lot of other operations, is that speed, agility, precision bring a quality to the fight that, when networked properly, is at least for the world we're in now, appropriate. And so the objective is find the right capability of network technology that can enhance the speed, the agility, and the mobility, the precision of our forces, and the Army is at the leading edge of that thinking. And I think the Army that exists today is so vastly different from the Army that existed 10 years ago because of that kind of thinking. And that's the discussion we're having.
And we don't want it to weigh too much.
And we don't want it to weigh too much. Yes.
Maybe
one or two. You guys don't want to get out of here.
An American soldier is formally under investigation in Italy for murder for the death of the Italian intelligence officer last March in Baghdad. I would like to know your reaction to this development and how this will affect the relationship between the United States and Italy.
Well, on the latter point, Italy is an important ally of the United States. We're a NATO ally. We're a coalition ally. The relationship with the United States and Italy is broad, it's deep, and it's important. What happened last March, I believe, in Baghdad was obviously a terrible tragedy, a terrible personal tragedy that was investigated by the coalition, and the Italian government participated in that investigation. On the basis of that investigation, the investigators concluded that the soldiers involved followed the rules of engagement, that it was a terrible accident, but that no further action was necessary. we certainly understand that the Italian government has its view, but that's our view, and we don't believe further investigation is warranted.
Larry, you made
Do you
it
have
sound
any-
like it was
No,
a.
you never.
I'm sorry, you made it sound like it was a joint investigation. They cooperated, but they had two separate investigations, and the Italian government didn't necessarily agree that no.
I stand by precisely what I said. They participated in the investigation, and the Italian government has its view of that investigation. I didn't want to make it sound what you just made it sound like. I understood what happened. What happened was a terrible tragedy. We did investigate it. The Italian government participated in that investigation, and the reports have been widely discussed.
But you said the investigators agreed that no further action should be taken, and the Italian.
The investigators concluded that no further action was
The
necessary.
Italian investigators didn't necessarily conclude that. They had a lot of
Fair
questions.
enough. We do not believe further action was warranted on the basis of that investigation. Yep. Brian.
Just one last follow-up on
Okay.
Iraq. Election was a week ago. General, can you talk a little bit about sort of your military assessment? I know it's just a week, it's a snapshot in time, but what have you seen over the last week in terms of the insurgency attacks? We keep hearing about what seems like a fairly quiet period. Does that mean anything?
You're talking about Iraq? Yeah. If you compare what's happening right now on the ground to, let's say, during the referendum period, interesting, just about all the indicators are down. And that's, of course, a very positive development. We thought that there would be more hostility on the part of the insurgency during the actual election. That did not occur. We're seeing numbers of casualties, numbers of attacks, numbers of suicide, VBIDs, all those indicators that we track routinely are down. It's also interesting that that saturation point that we thought would come with the Iraqi people, we think is starting to take place. And I think it was tied to the vote in some regards. We're seeing what we call red on red, where insurgents are actually going against the AQI because they think they've overstepped any reasonable bounds in terms of their actions, in a lot of cases resulting in the death of Iraqis, and in some cases women and children. All those we think are positive developments, and we think in some ways contribute to this comparative decline in those critical figures that we follow. So overall, the assessment, I think, is somewhat positive viewing the last few weeks.
General, to what extent do you believe that this reduction in attacks and casualties resulted from any contacts or negotiations between MNFI and the insurgents?
Yeah, I honestly don't have a feel for that. I've read about it. It has not been reported officially. I probably know what you know just based on what I've been able to read. I do know that those people from time to time do attempt to reach out. Even when I was there, they wanted to sometimes come together with us. We would say to them, show us that you have a say-so over these people who are carrying weapons, and then we will take it from there. They were never really able to do that. So I have my own skepticism, I guess, about the accuracy of some of those reports. So I don't attribute much to it because I just don't think that they control that much of what we see in terms of the anti-Iraqi forces.
What's the policy on negotiating with the terrorists, so to speak?
Well, we don't negotiate with terrorists. What the issue is, how do we manage groups that want to reach out to either the Iraqi government or the coalition and say, "Geez, we're ready to rethink this." It is something that happens at various levels, and it's done with the full consultation or full understanding, generally speaking, with the Iraqi government. We don't. What you said is not what's going on. What we're trying to do is pull off the fence sitters, the ones who say, "Okay, I get it. Enough is enough. I'm not with them anymore." And that's an important objective, military and political objective of what's going on in Iraq right now. In the spirit of the season, we'll take two more, and that'll have to do.
To follow up on this, is the U.S. released some high-value targets very recently, including Iraqi scientists who worked on German biological warfare programs. Is it possible that the reduction in violence that you just described has something to do with the release of those prisoners?
There have been, again, no official reports to indicate that there's any connection to that whatsoever. There's a process that's followed when high-value prisoners or targets, as you characterize them, are released. The Iraqi government was part and parcel to that. It was done consciously, I think, based on a number of factors that went into the judgment. So I think those are probably, we would say, more likely the rationale or the thought process behind it than any negotiation with the leadership of the anti-Iraqi forces.
So there was no deal made?
There's a process, and to the best of our understanding, the process was followed in this case as well. I mean, we're in regular consultations with the Iraqi government on detainees. They have a process, we have a process, and these kinds of releases, particularly on the high value end, are done with full consultation of the Iraqi government. So,
General Conway, you mentioned transition teams are going to be teaching the Iraqi security forces how to call in help from U.S. forces. Are U.S. forces going to teach them how to call in airstrikes? And if so, about how many Iraqis do you envision to be trained as such by the end of next year?
We're not there yet. We do have a fledgling Iraqi Air Force. It's flying C-130s and some other mixture, really, of helicopters. But I would not say that's not something that
American fighters.
Right now, I'm saying that is not within the state of the art. But that's not to say that one day that couldn't be something that we would envision taking place. It's progressive. We take steps at a time. I think first we would teach them, if they don't already know it, how to call in artillery, mortar fire, those types of things as intermediate level supporting arms.
Are we giving the Iraqis artillery as well, or would this be calling American artillery or Iraqi?
Right now, the only artillery, functional artillery, is American artillery. Again, as we develop their combat support units, I think you're going to see artillery. You already see armor. So I think, again, as we progress down that line, you'll see increasing Iraqi capabilities. I suspect one day to include air as well.
Thanks very much, folks. Have a great holiday.
Can you give us a ballpark how much you'll ask for Iraq and Afghanistan?
I cannot. I don't even know, frankly, offhand what the status of all of that is at the moment. So,
Merry
thanks,
Christmas,
folks.
Merry Christmas.